Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Michael Prue, and I'm with Carrion Communications for Nav Air. We're going to continue with our wonderful group of speakers today, and we're welcoming to the stage Captain Chad Reed. He oversees the Unmanned Carrier Aviation Program Office, where he manages the MQ-25 Alpha Stingray. We're going to let Captain Reed speak, and then we'll open the floor for questions and allow one follow-on question today. We're also coming to you live on LinkedIn, so if we have them, we will take virtual questions from there as well. So over to you, sir.
Thanks, Michael. I'm good. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Noel. Not used to hearing the echo. Hi, Rev. How you doing? So good afternoon. As she mentioned, I'm Captain Chad. I'm either speaking too loud or walking too far already. You need to scoot back? Okay. So sorry, we'll work this out as we get going. As she mentioned, I'm the program manager for unmanned carrier aviation. And obviously, the particularly well-known portion of that is MQ-25. And so I'll give you an update, particularly MQ-25 today, but also look into the future and the opportunities that we see in this space. Some of you all, I think, were here this morning for Admiral Corey as he talked about the unmanned portfolio and about weapons and the unmanned portfolio. So some of that I'll touch on, what he spoke about, but it's really focused on MQ-25 and what we're doing to get to the carrier in the next year or so. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So many of you are familiar already with our program and the way it's set up, but our program office for MQ-25, particularly in unmanned carrier aviation, is in two main areas. We've got the air vehicle. It obviously is our prime contract with Boeing, and Dave Bujold, you see here in the audience, who's done tremendous work with the team out there. Hey, Ashley, in getting MQ-25 to the fleet. We'll talk as we go through here. We've got a video also showing about the tremendous work that went into getting MQ-25 in the air with a Super Hornet later on. But as you see there, what they're handling for us is the air vehicle, in particular the deck handling system, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a bit, and getting us those air vehicles where we now have 7 air vehicles that Boeing is building for us, plus a static and fatigue article. But those 7 air vehicles is what we see being the future for this program and getting us tested and into the operational Navy. It also gives us a leg up on introducing it, and not just introducing it, but having the fleet work with us side by side with those 7 air vehicles to already begin learning how to maintain it, how to fly it, and then gathering valuable test data as we go along. The other part of our program is our MD5 control station. We just recently changed part of the direction as we've been going through. This has been quite a journey, right? I'll take a little bit of pause and maybe a little bit of a segue, but to say that my almost 4 years now in this program, this really has been a knowledge creating program. We've learned an awful lot. Now you might think, well, this isn't the first unmanned airframe to be introduced to the military or anywhere, right? We've got a lot of incredible programs that have a history at Nav Air between Triton, between Fire Scout, Blackjack, and other programs around Nav Air. What's unique about our program and what we've really learned a lot about the last few years is what Admiral Corey talked about this morning. This is the first time that we've got a Group 5 aircraft that is intended to connect with manned aircraft, or as the Brits say, uncrewed aircraft. First time we've intended to do this. With that, it's also the first time that we've put MQ-25 into the carrier environment in the overhead stack and put it into the at-sea environment. So what does that also do? It also stresses those networks. It stresses the way that we get RF, those command and control messages, get the data from the air vehicle back to the people that need it, that we tell the air vehicle what to do and how to do it. It's also stressed or helped us to learn a lot in the areas of what do we do when we don't have that RF. That obviously is a topic that I'm not going to get into here, but how the fleet operates today there's reasons that at times they need to be able to operate in a denied environment. And so all that we've learned with respect to networks, controlling the air vehicle, you see is contained within this learning, these two areas between Boeing, Lockheed, and the government team as the lead systems integrator to work all this and get this to the fleet as fast as possible. On the unmanned carrier aviation mission control system side, I already mentioned Lockheed Martin is our partner for the ground control station itself. I started to mention that that was really the direction as we sat down with a former secretary for RDA, Secretary Gertz, Hondo Gertz, and as we discussed the future of unmanned carrier aviation, we recognized for a number of reasons it was important for us to change the direction we were going with ground control stations. So really excited about where we're going with Lockheed on that. Our team, though, also handles the integration with carriers. Right now, you'll see on a later slide that we're on 4 carriers, and we're also working on another 4 to get the control station room itself. We call that the Unmanned Air Warfare Center. And right now, that's just intended for aviation, particularly for MQ-25. But we have been building that space, that room on the carrier for the future, to be able to handle all sorts of different information, I'll say, and to be able to support whatever comes next. Again, it's certainly about MQ-25, but it's also about what's next, being the Unmanned Carrier Aviation Program Office. Let's go to the next slide. So why unmanned? Some of y'all have seen this before as well, and you saw it even way back 3-4 years ago. I know people like Rich and Justin were there with us when C&O Richardson introduced Boeing as the winner of the competition for MQ-25. But it's been a long time we've been talking about unmanned in the carrier environment, going all the way back to probably the early 2000s when we talked about JUCAS. So that hasn't changed as our need for having that unmanned presence out at sea, being able to reach further. And as C&O Richardson and now C&O Gilday, as we morphed a bit in our plan from U-class getting to MQ-25, it still was important for us, now with a tanker, to extend the reach of that carrier strike group. And you see that as we continue in this long-term strategic competition, the vital importance of getting MQ-25 to the fleet. Next slide, please. So our challenge from the C&O, from C&O Richardson and from Gilday now was, Chad, get this out as fast as you can. Working with Boeing as our partner and now working with Lockheed on the ground control station, that is still our goal, is to get it out to the fleet as soon as possible. Because of that, through being an accelerated acquisition program, there certainly has been some accelerated learning, I would say. But having the support of our entire chain in the Navy has been vital to our success as well, for people to understand how in 6.5 years, we're going to go from a contract award to IOC on a U.S. aircraft carrier. Next slide, please. So just to kind of wet your whistle, but of course, I know you're aviation aficionados, this won't be enough for you. You're going to want speed, you're going to want systems, you're going to want to know a lot more than what's on this slide. Obviously, for reasons that you understand, though, this is what we'll give you for now. But as you can tell, for those that know the size of other aircraft on the carrier, this is about the same size as a Super Hornet today. One of our other charges or directions was have the least impact on the carrier flight deck and on operations aboard the carrier as you can. So we've minimized our footprint as much as possible. We do plan to have 5 Stingrays aboard the aircraft carrier at any one time, deployed with detachments and operating on the flight deck. We'll prove that out here pretty soon, and I'll talk to that here later on in the brief. But getting to freeing up the strike fighters for their strike fighter mission is vital also for us in delivering that fuel hundreds of miles away from the aircraft carrier. As you see on there, a couple other, maybe I'll say they're buzz phrases right now, but they mean something to us. You've seen in the press the C&O talk about his unmanned campaign framework. It's important for us to be aligned with that framework. And as we're aligned with the C&O's intent for unmanned for the Navy, we also need to stay aligned with, you heard the C&O talk yesterday about Project Overmatch. Going back to a common theme that I've woven throughout this now so far in the last, 10 minutes, is the learning that we've had on this program. A lot of that learning was in the area of networks. I mentioned to you, how do we talk to the air vehicle? How do we do that in an environment that's not suited maybe for what we're doing? How do we talk to other platforms? How do we get information to the people that need it, not just on that in the strike group, but also elsewhere in the Navy? So that's what we're working on right now to stay aligned with Project Overmatch, what Admiral Small is doing out west with NAVWAR and with the folks out of PEO-C4I, but some incredible opportunities for us in the future for MQ-25, for unmanned carrier aviation, and for the Navy. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I talked a little bit already about UMCS. Sometimes we like throwing around acronyms, much sometimes to our peril. But just to orient you, I talked already about the UOC, the Aviation Warfare Center, what we're doing with C4I. But this systems of systems approach, we have worked hard, all of us on this program, industry, the Navy, folks out west with NAVWAR, folks out east here with NAVC and with NAVAIR, to ensure that that connectivity is there from day one. That the systems that we have aboard the carriers today, we're utilizing those systems. Now through that we have learned, and we're making some changes for how we integrate with Project Overmatch, what we do there for supporting that vision and those technologies. But again, it's an area that we're excited about what we're going to learn here in the future. Next slide. So fleet integration and operations. Again, some of you know from when we awarded the contract that from day one, we had the fleet operators involved with our program. This is the first time I've been on a program where the moment I started EMD, I knew who my operational tester was. They were a part of our team. They were out at Boeing weekly. Which brings me to that partnering again with Boeing, is having the fleet with our team, some of the people in this audience that were part of our, what we call our GMAT, our Government Embedded Maritime Acceleration Team, that was out at Boeing every day of the week, every week, to collaborate, to make decisions quickly. The fleet has been a part of that. I mentioned how the fleet also will be involved with our test aircraft. We already have fleet testers, operators that go with us out to Boeing. Right now, if you're not familiar, I know some of you in the front row are very familiar, but right now we're testing out in Mascoutah, Illinois. We're already testing the Boeing prototype called T1. And the fleet operators have had the opportunity. As an example, we had our first engine change ever on an MQ-25 aircraft. Same engine we'll have on MQ-25s. The fleet was there thanks to Boeing and Rolls-Royce and the partnership we have there. They were a part of seeing that first engine change ever, already learning about how we maintain this air vehicle. I talked about the detachments, but to make up or to send out those detachments, we have two CONUS-based MQ-25 squadrons. If you didn't know, they're named VUQ 11 and 12, along with the Fleet Replacement Squadron, the FRS VUQ 10. And that last bullet there, that already the Navy has studied, is looking at how do we train, first of all, how do we recruit, how do we train those air vehicle operators that will be the future for this program. Next slide, please. All right, I mentioned just now T1. T1 has been tremendous. T1 has allowed us to learn lessons that normally on a program you don't learn until you get your test aircraft. Same aerodynamics, same engine as MQ-25 when those roll off the production line. And what we've learned, and it's not always, as you would well know, it's not always in the areas of just the engineering. It's also what we've learned in the trailer at Boeing on controlling the air vehicle. It's also what we've learned working with the FAA. It's what we've learned with the operators being able to sit. Because of, again, that partnership, we've had testers, green flight suit wearing operational folks from VX1, from VX23, from VX20 that have been able to get out there and get trained as AVOs to sit next to the Boeing operators and give them feedback, intake feedback. You know, sometimes we can, believe it or not, we can get scope locked into a certain way of operating. You know, my years of having training in Pensacola, in the VTs, and then in the FRS, and sometimes you think the way to operate an airplane is this way. Being able to sit side by side with people that have different ways of thinking and looking at the world and looking at aviation, you know, we've learned, well, why do we do it that way? Why do we have to control an air vehicle? Why did the displays have to look like this? Is it because of when I was sitting in there with a stick and throttle? Well, I wasn't. I was sitting in the back seat or side seat. But anyhow, but is it because of that, or is it because that is human factors wise the right way to do it? That learning has been taking place on T1, and we look forward to the future learning that we'll get on T1. Admiral Corey mentioned this morning that what's to come ahead. In fact, I think it's my next. So let's not go to the next slide yet, but to make sure there's not something else I want to mention to you. Next slide should be our video. So I really want to highlight the successful tanking operations that we had with a Super Hornet from VX-23 out in Mascoutah, Illinois at Mid-America Airfield recently. We're going to show you a video here in a minute, and I think I still have time. So why don't we go ahead, if it works. Let's go to the next slide.
We did have a really good view of once we got joined on MQ-25 of, you know, its flight characteristics, and as soon as it leveled out, and it was smooth, very smooth lead aircraft to fly off of, and we were able to decrease and increase the roll rate with the aircraft and kind of see what that looks like, and you know, now we can make good recommendations to the fleet moving forward on where we think those numbers should be. So I think that's some of the really good, important testing that we're doing now, so we can get a good product out to the fleet eventually.
Yeah, MQ-25 is going to carry, you know, a lot of gas, which is going to extend the legs of the air wing, let us do our mission, and let us use more Super Hornets for the strike fighter mission. Yeah, it was cool for, you know, to get all the engineering team together and do the investigations and the risk reduction and make sure it's all going to work out. Show that, you know, manned and unmanned can work together, and even something so close and precise as aerial refueling. As aerial refueling.
Go to the next slide. You know, it's a bit of an eye chart. I don't know if Rev can even see that from there. Some of y'all, you've got your phones. I see a lot of people putting them up in the air and taking a picture. A lot to digest there. Let me boil it down to a few things, right? Particularly over the next year. We're right in this area, and you see their first air-to-air refueling. You see here, UCA shipboard demo, unmanned carrier aviation shipboard demo. That to me, again, it's the bread and butter, right? You saw already part of the bread and butter, which was the F-18 and tanking with the F-18. What we'll do here in the next quarter to 6 months is we're going to take MQ-25, we're going to take T1 with its deck handling equipment to a U.S. aircraft carrier, and we're going to drive it around the flight deck, and we're going to see how well it operates on board a U.S. aircraft carrier. At the same time, we're going to bring a ground control station from Lockheed Martin, also bring that out to demonstrate the ground control station capabilities. Now, right now, I'm sure there's probably some questions. I don't want to lead people astray. We right now aren't able to talk to the two yet. That's future work that we have to do. That's the integration work, having just brought on the new ground control station that will be done. But for now, we are going to demonstrate both those technologies aboard a carrier. That's really important for us to get to. Then obviously you see over the next, you know, so my relief here in the next couple of months when he comes on board, it's an exciting time. I wish I didn't have to go for that reason. We're going to have a lot of testing during the next few years, cats and traps, going aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier, not just for deck handling, but for the flying. And we're going to show that this system, thanks to the partnership we have, thanks to the teaming that we have, thanks to the people that have worked together even through this tough time of COVID, the successes that we've had, I anticipate they're going to continue. I think I'm getting pretty close, aren't I, Michael? Yep. Yeah, ready for questions. So, obviously, any questions?
Thank you. Steve Trumbull with Aviation Week. With the, could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by the change of direction for the UMCS? And also, we've seen the numbers for the IOC. I think a contract award, it was at 2026. And we saw it at 2024. Now it's 2025. You talked about accelerating it, but what was going on there? And does that dovetail with what you're talking about with the change of direction on?
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. And let me first start with, I probably overused the word acceleration because really that acceleration was, and that pace that our program was put on that pace at the day that you all were at that contract award announcement with Sino Richardson. So it was at that point that he said to us and to our team, we need IOC this in 6 years. What we've seen by bringing on and changing to a new ground control station, Steve, that there is going to be some work we have to do for the integration and some rework, I would say, and maybe rework isn't the right word for it, but we were developing the ground control station, us down at PAX. And so we're a little bit ahead of as far as the integration and bringing it, getting a station to Boeing, putting stations in our labs. So it's work that has to be done. But certainly by no stretch of the imagination is Lockheed Martin behind. We just brought them on in this April. Let me get now to your other question as to why. There's some of that I can't go into, and I know that you'll understand why if we could talk about it. It started off with us looking at really what's one of the pacing items for us in naval aviation. It's our carriers. It's having them ready, tip of the spear, where they need to be, when they need to be there. Having to fold in all that testing with particular carriers because we have to have the ground control station room, the UOC, ready at the time. We realized it was taking us down to only having 1 or 2 carriers available for test. So it started off as a conversation of, is there a ground control station that we can use that provides us with that flexibility where we can take, we call it our embarkable, we can take an embarkable aboard any US aircraft carrier and test or operate. So that embarkable capability gives us now that flexibility that we didn't have with the system we were developing, that we can now go to any US aircraft carrier with those, I'll say, those ground control stations in a Connex box. Now that's not our permanent plan, and I'm probably getting into too many details right now, Steve, but obviously if you have questions in the future. But there were some other considerations. I mentioned JADC2 earlier. This new ground control station allows us that future growth capability to connect with joint all-domain command and control networks. For us to support where Admiral Small and the CNO are going with Project Overmatch. We now have those increased capabilities. What we did by going to this new ground control station is we brought future capabilities forward. And I probably should stop it there. That answer your question, Steve? Thanks for your question.
Hey, Captain, can you confirm, Rick Burgess, CPR Magazine, can you confirm that the E2 squadron on the carrier will be the host for the detachments?
Yeah, so and the Commodore, let me start off here, is the Commodore for the E2C2 wing was designated by the Air Boss as the Commodore for the MQ-25 fleet. So MQ-25 is now underneath the E2 wing. They will support, I'll say, maybe I shouldn't use this phrase, but the care and feeding for the detachment while they're aboard. But they also will be assigned to MQ-25 squadrons that also report to the E2C2, now MQ-25 or Stingray Commodore as well. That answer your question, Rick?
So we have just a couple minutes, but we do have one of our virtual questions that came in. It says, will the Stingray ever hold armament?
That's always a fun one. You know, I think back to when they asked, I think Vice Admiral Kilby, that same question. Let me put it this way, is there's no requirement right now for MQ-25 to carry ordnance, to carry weapons. That also, and this may seem like a bit of a rabbit trail, but that can also be a pretty, I'll say, emotional or moral question, right? Is and that's not really the right word, but there's a lot of discussion about unmanned vehicles having weapons. I know that we've wrestled through that over the years with MQ-29, or MQ-9, I should say, and Reaper. But right now, MQ-25, there is no intention, at least not a requirement for our current program, to carry armament. Could it in the future? It certainly could. But right now, that's not a requirement for our program.
We have time for one more question. Sir, in the back.
Captain, good to see you. Yeah, I'm Ortiz Lockheed Martin. What compelled the Navy to trademark MQ-25A? Are we doing that with all the type model series now?
For the T-shirts. How's that? Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much. We're out of time right now, but we appreciate all of you being here. Thank you for joining us.